one area of interest for us, and I think, a key area of where technology should really focus in general, is how do we design for all abilities? And that is a place where haptics has a real opportunity. And certainly I'm very excited to see, many other companies really start to focus on how do we design for all accessibility levels. And that I think is a unique opportunity for all of those interactions and those new design methods that go beyond just the screen.
Welcome to today's episode of Staying Curious. I'm your host, Aimee Heuschkel, and today's guest is Billie Whitehouse. Billie is the CEO, designer, and director of Wearable X. Billie specializes in the combination of hardware, software, and apparel for wearable technology products. Known for her development of Nadi X, a state-of-the-art technology to optimize your yoga, Billie is invigorating the fashion industry and transforming it into a business focused on improving the quality of our lives. In 2021, Billie and Wearable X were featured in Venice Biennale and Musée de l'Homme Limits of Humanity Expedition in Paris. Business Insider recently named Billie as one of the 30 most important women under 30 in tech, and she was named in the 100 most creative people in business by Fast Company. A recent highlight was winning the Fashion Group International Design Technology Award and being named one of the most innovative companies in fitness by Fast Company. In 2016, she was the winner of the Wearable Award in Paris at the Showroom Privé, as well as being featured on the Jimmy Fallon Show. Please join me in welcoming Billie.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Billie, for joining us. I'm super excited to speak with you. How are you doing today?
The feeling is mutual. Very happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, no, your stuff is amazing. I been very tempted to buy myself some of your wearable technology. So I'd love for you to kind of start out by just sort of talking a little bit about what you're currently doing. What is Wearable X?
Yeah, happy to start there. So my name is Billie Whitehouse. Thank you again for having me. I'm the creative director and CEO of Wearable Experiments, also known as Wearable X. And we are an ingredient brand. And really, over the last 10 years, we've specialized in using a combination of sensors as well as haptic feedback and building that into textiles. And specifically, what we've been working on the last almost 6 years now is a product called Nadi X, which is the product hopefully you will go and buy, which is essentially a yoga tool. And it allows you to practice yoga at home with the confidence and the convenience of having a teacher there. So we can actually measure each one of your poses. And we, in fact, guide you on how to move into each one of those poses with haptic feedback, which is built into the garment itself in the hips, the knees, and the ankles. And that's paired with sensors that are also located in those areas so that we can actually determine whether you make it into your downward dog or whether you need to go back and try again. And we built this, honestly, because I have a frustration with yoga and my own flexibility. Because I really wasn't confident enough to practice by myself. And I was going to class with sometimes 100 different people in New York City. And I was often not getting the adjustments that I wanted, or in a class where someone was becoming a pretzel next to me and sweating all over me. And often the teachers would change last minute and the music would be terrible. And I found myself not in that zen place of yoga that I should have been, and in that frustrated place of oh Christ, why am I paying for this? And luckily enough, I'd been working with a really amazing team for 4 years prior to that, where we had been building with Haptics up and around then, and we had our B2B business well established. And from there, we actually decided to launch our direct-to-consumer line, Nadi X. But we really consider ourselves more like a Gore-Tex or a Laura Piano, where we are both the innovation, so the smarts that can live inside any product, as well as have our own product line. And truly, I can honestly say that I don't think we would be as good in our B2B business if we had never taken our own product to market. You learn so much from your customer, and you learn so much from having a product in the wild. It's vastly different than being a B2B partner.
So how did you get started? Like, what made you get involved with this wearable technology to begin with, to even get to the point where you could launch your own line? Like, what? How did it all get started?
Well, I mean, I have to say it's not dissimilar to the title of your podcast. It was like a feverish curiousness, where I had, delightfully, I was working for my family business, my mom's family business, and I was researching a lot of like what was the future in the next 10 years of her business going to look like. In doing so, I like came up with a couple of pillars. Wearable technology was one of them. 3D printing was potentially another, customization and personalization being a big part of education in that process as well. But I ultimately was deep diving into a range of spaces and had come up with a few product ideas of my own. One of the greatest lessons you'll ever learn is like when to actually shelve your products and not to continue down that path. But at the time I was sort of spending my own money investing in two different areas of research. One was around a wrist wearable for dispensing perfume, and the other was an idea at the time that was called knickers in a knot, tie them in the right spot. And delightfully, in that sort of hybrid world I was living in of exploring my own things as well as having a full-time job, I got a phone call from an advertising agency, and they said, "Come on in. We want to talk to you about working with a partner of ours." And I often would vet opportunities for students. And this particular one was with a slightly risque company. And so it wasn't quite appropriate for the group of students to work with. But then they said, actually, we just think that you should do it. And that ultimately is what became Funderwear. And Funderwear is vibrating underpants for couples in long distance relationships, which was our first ever foray into wearable technology. We like to say that, if porn started the internet, Funderwear started wearable technology with textiles.
So the perfect segue. So what is the current landscape of wearable technologies? Like, how is this shifting from what you did when you first started and where you are now? Like, what does the landscape look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of like almost two landscapes there. There's like, what are we focused on? And then there's like, what is the industry itself? Like, the industry itself is enormous, 115 billion. And, that is whether that's specific to wrist devices or rings or whichever wearable you choose to use. It's essentially like the quantification of your wellness and fitness. What we have done and where we've always focused is how does that really apply to a piece of clothing that you might wear? And I really do still believe in technology fading into everything that we put on every day, and not just being limited to one part of the body, whether that's your wrist, your hand, or your foot. I really believe that we can actually gather far more interesting data and have a far more meaningful experience for the wearer if it is fully integrated into their life. So for us, we've been focusing on haptic feedback for the last 10 years. And that the haptic platform that we've built really is manipulatable. It can be in every shape and size. We've done underpants, bras, t-shirts, jumpsuits, yoga pants, like arm sleeves, you name it, we've done it. And as I said, like not everything is going to make it to market, but where we've really been narrowing our focus in the last 2 years is on this area of recovery. Which in itself is a niche inside the wearable technology community, but a really important one, because anyone who cares about their fitness and wellness knows that there can be injuries, and to ultimately prevent those injuries, we need to do certain things. But certainly, if they happen, we also need to prepare ourselves of like what is the best and fastest way to recover. So we don't put we don't put too much pressure on the infrastructures, but B, we don't put too much pressure on ourselves. And so that accountability and how do we make sure that we're doing this correctly is to us the most exciting thing. And we're really engaged in how does yoga and our technology really support those who suffer from lower back pain. I don't know if you can tell I'm actually on like an exercise ball right now. I mean, I'll bounce so you can
I
see.
do. I realize it now.
Yeah. But it's everything. It's not just you don't just fix your lower back like that. It's all about the core. It's all about the other muscles around, and how do we actually help do that and help people actually recover in a way that's useful.
That's so interesting, because as somebody who has taken on exercise at a whole other level in my later years in life, as I gotten older, it's recovery is something that it's a totally different thing you have to focus on. Because before you were so focused on the activity, but if you don't focus on the recovery, you're never getting yourself up in the morning again. So
Yep.
it's a very interesting spot. So data collection. So you talked a little bit about it. What role does that data collection play, in delivering the value to the end customer? So talk a little bit about how important that data is um, to the consumer. And what do they really do? They even know that they want this data? Like
Yeah.
how are you making people know that they want that in the first place?
I mean, there's so many fascinating stories to tell here. um, I'll at least explain some of the journey of creating Nadi X and the data collection effort necessary to do that. And then there's a secondary story, which is like, where and how is that valuable to the customer? Um, to create Nadi X, we had to collect data on up to 100 different yogis of all different levels. And that means your beginner, your intermediate, your advanced. And we also had to collect on every different size that we were making for, so extra small to extra large. In addition to that, we also had to collect on male and female, and when they have the pants on correctly and incorrectly, and when they're doing the pose correctly and incorrectly. So there was an astronomical amount that we had to do to even get ready to launch this. And I really don't even know if a customer appreciates how much effort goes into doing this.
I'm
And
sure they don't.
yeah, I'm sure they don't either. And I think it almost, and I'll say it out loud, but I think some sci-fi films actually do smart textiles a disservice because they've created a vision of what can be one day when everything is fully integrated, really tiny, absolutely seamless. We're not there yet. And so the way we've built this now is that you get step-by-step guidance and we evaluate your pose, but we base that evaluation off all that data that we've collected in the past. And so it's sort of frustrating that no one realizes how much work this is. It's years of work. And look, that's okay. We're on this journey. We're on this path regardless. Then there's the conversation of why is an individual's data valuable to them? And I think this is where we get into a really interesting part of can I track my recovery over time, and can I see the improvement both in the way I'm performing my pose or also in my own physical experience. And generally we do really want that. We want to see that in the data. We want that validation that this is working, but we also want to see it in ourselves. And so where we've always tried to focus is how do we make data physically tangible to people? And so that's why we focused on haptics. It is an area that creates an immediate response. It's very visceral. You should see people's faces when they feel the vibrations for the first time. It's undeniable. And we wanted to make that so obvious because we want people to actually pay attention to their data, to their recovery, to their posture. And we want them to actually settle back into their body. We spend a lot of time up in our heads, myself included. I'm guilty of much of this. That's why I need this tool. Up in our heads, contemplating, pontificating, living these very, very high speed lives. What we're trying to do in encouraging with haptics is to bring people back into their bodies, focus on those areas of the bodies, lengthen those muscles, tighten those muscles, rotate those muscles in the way that is necessary to actually then hold the pose for the length of time that is necessary for your recovery or just to achieve that pose itself.
Oh, that's fantastic. So one of the things when we talked before, you talked about technology innovation in a world that's dominated by screens, but you have this vision of the screen being gone, that we have this technology in our daily lives. Talk a little bit about that. What is, you talked about ambient technology in the fashion industry. What is that? What is that? I have a lot of conversations with people about the physical and the digital worlds of fashion being in a 3D environment as well as, something that you wear physically. But when you start to get into ambient technology and something where you just take the screen completely out of it, now you're getting into where technology is just following us in our everyday lives. and not me having to sit here in this seat within a screen. So talk a little bit about that.
So two things I'll do first and foremost is acknowledge those who've like come up with these terms. So David Rose wrote a book called Enchanted Objects. Tremendous book. It speaks about the difference between the terminal world and the enchanted object world. And so that concept, really inspired me. Um, Secondarily, Google really speaks about ambient technologies being the future regularly, and I quote that because I genuinely believe in that version of the future, and it's this parallel between that enchanted objects and this ambient computing that I think is the fusion we're really trying to work on, and so delighted that I can have interactions with those two big companies, both David Rose, who was at MIT, and Google itself, and I'm able to then say, these things are really valuable. These technologies that are being built can genuinely do wonderful things for people, but we have to come back to the why. And I think that's the really important factor for me is, we at the get-go of our company decided that there were three pillars we would work on. We want to build technologies and experiences that help people connect to themselves. We want to build technologies and experiences that help them connect with each other, and technologies and experiences that allow them to connect to those moments in time that are really valuable to them. And I think if we're always keeping ourselves like honest and within those realms, we're going to be building things that are important for people. And what David Rose really speaks about in his book is that, at the moment, our work life, most certainly, and certainly during the pandemic, even our social life, was entirely dominated by a screen or the terminal world. And, what happens when that isn't the only mode of communication, and that isn't the only way we can interact with people? I'm really inspired by Google ATAP's work with a sensor called Soli, and it is something that it like truly inspires me, and it's a micro radar, and that in itself allows for gestures that are very human gestures, whether that's turning the volume up or changing the song or answering a call, and these things that we physically do in our daily life being designed for in technology, I think is the path forward. And it's certainly why I always designed for the skin as an interface, as a response. So using the skin to actually communicate back to you, not having to have this like audio and visual feedback as the only form. It's also very important to be a form, and I think ultimately the best sort of communication or interaction is when you have multiple senses being interacted with. And that's why we've always focused on, giving you audio feedback, visual feedback, and haptic feedback on the way into a pose. When once upon a time when we were building a fan jersey, we really talked about writing songs for the body. And these songs were related to emotional states that a football team or an AFL team were going through in real time. And I often used music as a correlation because music is this very sensory experience, highly emotional. It can bring up, very, very interesting memories for people. Haptics has the same capability. And so we would replicate things like heartbeat, like gugum, 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 and get faster and faster and faster. We would also replicate chills down the spine or the easing of a like a celebration. These sensations are really interesting. Like smell, in another sense, they're things that can be learned. And one area of interest for us, and I think a key area of where technology should really focus in general, is how do we design for all abilities? And that is a place where haptics has a real opportunity. And certainly I'm very excited to see many other companies really start to focus on how do we design for all accessibility levels, and that I think is a unique opportunity for all of those interactions and those new design methods that go beyond just the screen.
It's fascinating. I can't wait for that because I like to get out of the screen and have experiences. So haptic technology gives you this sort of sensory feeling, allows you to collect data. What needs to happen for the general population to actually understand and then ultimately adopt this technology? Obviously, I have my Apple Watch on. people wear their watches, they the ring for their fitness, but how else do we get people to adopt this technology? So maybe it isn't just about fitness, it's about everything in their lives, like you said, the sensations of at being at a in the crowd at a football game. What is it going to take, do you think, for this to be adopted?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. I think, timing is everything. And often
Mhm.
timing comes down to a few factors. Is it cheap enough? Does it last long enough? Is it ultimately like really solving a problem for me? And then like when you come to down, like, is it really solving a problem for me? Some things, and I love this about fashion and art actually, and it's one of the reasons I sort of cross between those worlds, is that not everything has to solve a problem. Some things can just be a beautiful experience. And so you have to be a beautiful experience. You have to sort of meet someone's need. It has to be the right timing in terms of, cost and being able to distribute. And, all of these things have to magically come together at one time. It's coming. And if not, like, already here. And delightfully, we've been ahead of the curve for a long time, but it's less about being ahead and more about being there when it actually happens. And that's ultimately, what we believe in, and why we would never give up. I think, if you're a company looking to see what else is happening or going to happen, it's very, very interesting to see what the large companies, like that company that starts with A and is a fruit, what they're trying to patent. And you'll notice that there are
Yeah,
like great similarities to things that we already have patents in.
yeah,
And you'll see, that while they might not be doing it immediately, they've been behind the scenes working on many things in a similar vein for a long time. What I will say, and, delightfully, I can say this with confidence, is you just don't know until you've built it. And you
yeah,
just don't know until you've actually tested it with people. And ultimately, I wouldn't change a thing in terms of, what we've done and what we've released. Constantly iterating, always going to keep making changes, always going to keep growing and learning. Um, that's a forever journey, I think, for any company and any individual. But I do know that it isn't necessarily about the like being first or last. Although you'll notice with some of these companies they do wait,
yeah.
but it is more about, having the community trust, building something with them, making sure that you're constantly growing, making sure that you're proud of like your own 2 feet in that industry. And I think ultimately that's what we've always tried to do.
That's awesome. So give me two of the most exciting wearable technology innovations that are coming on the horizon.
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, Let me start with this. Most of the people working in the places that I think are really, really interesting won't have products in the market for about 5 years.
Okay.
and and it's a like delightfully frustrating industry that way,
Yeah.
but that is ultimately how hardware works. And it's not just hardware, by the way. It's many, many, many innovations. But once upon a time, and I haven't checked in with them for a while, there was a haptic polymer that I was very excited by. There was a company that eventually got bought by Bayer, and I really think that's an interesting way forward in terms of using these micro haptic feedback mechanisms back on the body. It's like having, a spidey sense, for lack of a better term, which ultimately, by the way, is all reading of vibrations. And so there's a lot of biomimicry that happens throughout this design process. Not all of the time is that technology ready. And is it like way too expensive, and does it integrate well, and we have to solve all of the connector issues. And so that, I would say, is like number two. I'm really interested in haptic polymers as number one. Number two is like just really solving some of the connector issues. It's been a forever conversation with many different parts of the industry. We've solved some of it, and we have more to learn in other areas. But ultimately, if there's a worldwide solution for that, that will be really exciting. I don't think anyone's done it yet, and actually, I think that's probably where there's an opportunity then. And there are still challenges around that, and I don't know who yet is the person to do it, but I'm excited to see that happen.
Right. And what is the one industry that has the most to gain from with wearable technology, and why?
I mean, it's an easy one to answer, but I feel like we should like make it more complicated. So rather than me just giving you the easy answer, which of course is the wellness and fitness industry, then that really quickly moves into health.
Yeah.
And when you move into health and you go down the FDA path, you have a very different journey. That being said, I think that there's areas of health that aren't necessarily yet talked about, and one of which is pain mitigation. And that is an area for us that we are really, really interested in. And that's not just in the recovery space, but also how do haptics actually help with pain management? And is that a possibility? And we have very, very, very early research going on in that area. But I think that is fascinating. Then there's things like automotive. That's very much an area of interest for a lot of people, and going to continue to be really powerful. And ultimately, like, I think I always come back to like the human experience, which is like, how do we actually make experiences that are valuable for the person? Like, any one of these industries can make money with more data, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
And like,
Mm-hmm.
that is powerful regardless, as well as acknowledging that the data has to be like stored and managed in a safe GDPR like and compliant way. But any industry can make money from that. And whether that's like how your product is being used, which most people don't know. And
Yeah.
I find that kind of outrageous. People know up to a point of like, how do I get these customers to this funnel? And like when they purchase, I know a little bit about them, or I can pontificate about them, but they don't actually know like how and when the product is being used, which is still wild to me.
Yeah.
And so anyone who has a product that wants to learn about their customer, like the real customer, and how the product is used, can gain value from this type of validation.
And then on the flip side of that, it's also giving the customer the ability to gather their own data. And that's kind of the space you're playing in, right? Where it's like we all talk about the big companies getting our data, but how about you give some of that data back to me so that I can leverage it?
Yeah. And the individual has to care though. And
Yeah,
ultimately for a
true.
long time they haven't. And
Yeah.
they haven't, well, they also haven't understood the power of just, their own personal data and what they can leverage from it. If you can, then there's interesting things to happen.
Which is why it's interesting that you talked about health, because I do think that is an area where people will start caring. Um, even for myself with my dad, let's say, something that some technologies allows me to monitor a loved one might be a little bit easier to manage than being able to get my own data for myself, to get data on somebody else. Interesting idea. Um, all right. So when you work with this wearable technology, and do you work with what would you say to encourage a designer or a fashion designer who isn't really sure if it's worth it to be able to play in this wearable tech space? What would you say to encourage them that it's a journey worth taking?
I would always say like tread with caution because I think understanding first and foremost how absolutely hard it is. Mind you, I'm almost glad I had some ignorance at the beginning. And so, I would say to any young designer, like if like innovation is truly the piece of the puzzle that gets you up every day, without fail, just continue to learn and don't stop at one idea or one particular limitation or one investor that says no or whatever that blocker is. Never stop at just that first roadblock. You're going to have a million more, but know that there's always a way around. And I really do encourage you that if you love solving problems, or if you love finding solutions, or if you love really pushing the boundaries of a design or a concept or an experience, then this is probably for you. And if that is you, then you can't take no for an answer. There are there is, I would say more jobs in this area now than there were 10 years ago. And there are more jobs 10 years ago than there were 20 years ago. And so, while it's a unique space and has, a lot of things changing all the time and, is honestly challenging, I would still say it's really fun and you learn so much every day. And I think that to me is why I would keep doing it.
And what about a consumer? Sort of the same idea. Like, what would you say to the audience who's not looking to design with this wearable tech, but maybe just get involved and purchase something with wearable technology? What would you say to encourage them the importance of getting involved with that is, like going out and buying these yoga pants? Like, what is in your mind, what would you tell them is the one reason to do it?
I mean, I would tell them the reason that I would do it, which is, data can actually give you confidence. And practicing anything that is for your physical and mental well-being can also give you that peace of mind. So both pairing this like peace of mind, confidence at honestly like ultimately a cheaper cost than a gym membership or a continuous experience of going to a class 3-4 times a week. Make decisions that are good for you. And for me, that led me to wearable technology, which meant that I could practice with confidence and convenience at a better cost. Ultimately, that to me was a no-brainer of why wearable technology and specifically these yoga pants were going to be useful for people.
That's great. Well, Billie, this was fantastic. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of insight, a lot of audience members asking a lot of questions and visiting your site. So I appreciate your time today. This was very informational, and I can't wait to see what you're doing next. I mean, I feel like you're one to watch for sure. So I'll be sure to follow you. For anyone, for anyone interested, yeah, exactly. Anyone interested in connecting with Billie, her website for Wearable X is wearablex.com. I don't know if you want to mention your LinkedIn or Instagram.
Yeah, and on social we're at Wearable X, and I'm at Billie W House. So would love to connect with anyone who's interested, excited, or honestly just looking to learn.
Thank you. And so, Billie, it's been a pleasure. I thank you so much for your time today. And for everyone, I want to thank you for tuning in. Please continue to stay curious, as Billie clearly is. And remember to like and subscribe to our social medias to stay tuned for new episodes. Thank you. Have a great day.